When the cameras turned on, no one expected the most viral political moment of the year. But by the time it was over, one name was trending across the globe, and the other had vanished in silence. The debate hadn't started, but the tension was already suffocating. The CNN headquarters in Washington buzzed like a pressure cooker. Camera crews scurried. Lights gleamed off polished floors. The air was electric, half anticipation, half dread. Inside Studio One, every seat was packed. On the left side of the audience, professionally dressed liberals clutched handmade signs reading "Truth over Tyranny" and "Trump is a threat." On the right, a sea of red hats and flags created a MAGA wave, fists already clenched, chants ready to erupt. Behind the curtain, Alex Harper, the silver-haired host of CNN's Primetime Pulse, took a deep breath and adjusted his mic. He'd moderated dozens of debates, but tonight felt different. He stepped forward into the spotlight, voice steady but tinged with adrenaline. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Pulse. Tonight isn't just another discussion. It's a reckoning." The crowd responded instantly, half roaring approval, half booing with venom. Two voices, two Americas, one stage. He turned left with theatrical flourish. "Please welcome CNN's own senior political correspondent, Miles Hargrove." From the left wing strode a tall, sharp-suited man, with slicked-back hair and the kind of smug grin only found in elite cocktail parties. Miles Hargrove waved casually, soaking in the applause from his tribe like a king in court. Then Harper pivoted, extending an arm toward the right. And now her supporters call her a patriot, her critics call her relentless, the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt. The curtain on the right parted and out stepped Caroline, glowing in a crimson dress that screamed fire and defiance. Her eyes scanned the audience, steady, fearless. The MAGA crowd leapt to their feet. Chants of "USA! USA!" thundered through the studio. Miles folded his arms, already sneering. Caroline smiled slightly. This wasn't just a stage, it was a battlefield, and she was ready for war. One comment turned a political debate into a full-blown verbal brawl. Alex Harper lifted his hand, and the crowd hushed like obedient schoolchildren. "Let's begin with a simple question," he said, voice smooth as glass. "Miles, you've recently described Donald Trump as a clear and present danger to democracy. Care to explain?" Miles didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with theatrical contempt. "Of course, Donald Trump is not just a failed leader, he's a walking constitutional crisis. He's torn this country apart with lies, demagoguery, and a cult of personality. And Caroline Leavitt? She's his megaphone, a talking point factory in heels." The left side of the studio erupted in laughter and applause. Caroline didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed, unwavering, calm like a lion before the pounce. Miles continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "He lost in 2020. He incited an insurrection. He weaponized lies. And yet here we are, debating whether truth still matters in an age of madness. It's laughable." A voice from the MAGA crowd bellowed, "Sit down, Miles!" But Hargrove didn't flinch. "You can chant and you can cheer, but facts don't disappear just because a reality show host yells loud enough." Alex nodded neutrally, then turned to Caroline. "Miss Leavitt, your response." The audience hushed again, but Caroline didn't respond. Not immediately. She reached for her microphone, stood with spine straight, and said only 3 words. "Are you finished?" Miles blinked. "Excuse me?" Caroline tilted her head. "You seem very passionate about Donald Trump's flaws, but where's your passion for the American people?" She waited, and then she exploded, with facts that hit like grenades. Caroline stepped forward, her voice steady but rising with fire. "You call him dangerous? Let me tell you what's dangerous, Miles. It's dangerous when the media manipulates facts to push fear. It's dangerous when unelected elites decide that half the country doesn't deserve to be heard. That's what you represent. Not truth, but control. Gasps rippled. Some clapped. Others murmured. She didn't stop. Trump didn't divide this country. You did. People like you, with your filtered headlines and manufactured outrage. You've spent 6 years mocking the people who built this nation. Farmers, welders, cops, veterans. And now you want to lecture us about democracy? The MAGA side roared with applause. Go, Caroline! She turned directly to Miles. You sit in a Manhattan studio, sipping lattes, judging Americans who can't afford to fill their tanks. You've never been laid off, never worried about feeding your kids. But you think you understand this country? Miles shifted, his smirk fading. Caroline's voice rose, slicing through the air. You call me a megaphone? You're the amplifier of elitist arrogance. I speak for people you don't even see. And trust me, they're watching tonight. A thunderous chant began in the crowd. Caroline! Caroline! Even Alex Harper looked momentarily stunned. He brought emotions. She brought numbers. Miles leaned back in his chair, trying to recover. Well, that was a passionate monologue, he quipped, voice thin. But facts, Miss Leavitt, where are they? Trump left this country in economic ruin. He caused record debt. He was impeached twice. That's what your patriot stands for. Caroline smiled faintly. She was ready. Let's talk facts, she said. Under Donald Trump, the unemployment rate dropped to 3.5%, the lowest in 50 years. That's according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Wages grew 4.9%. Median household income hit a record high in 2019. The crowd leaned in. 5 million Americans were lifted out of poverty before the pandemic. Black unemployment hit an all-time low. Hispanic small business ownership rose by 34%. You want numbers, Miles? I've got a book full. Miles stammered. Those numbers. Caroline cut him off. Oh, and the $500 billion invested into opportunity zones? That wasn't fantasy. That was real money helping real people. Not Twitter hashtags, not CNN panels. Results. Cheers erupted. She turned back to Harper. You wanted facts? I'm just getting started. Miles tried to interject, but his voice was drowned out by chants. USA! USA! Harper raised his hands, failing to hide his awe. And with that, we'll go to break. But there was no break. Not for Miles, not from Caroline, and certainly not for the viewers glued to their screens, knowing this was only the beginning. What she said next made even her haters freeze in silence. As the studio lights pulsed and the audience buzzed, Alex Harper turned back to Miles Hargrove. Miles, he asked, trying to steady the moment, is there any merit to what Miss Leavitt just presented? Miles forced a smile, thin and cold. Look, I don't dispute raw data, but data without context is manipulation. Caroline is cherry-picking. She's ignoring the bigger picture. Trump's assault on the truth, his war against the media. That's not leadership. That's authoritarianism. He adjusted his tie, pausing for dramatic effect. Let's not forget, this is the same administration that coined alternative facts. If that doesn't terrify you, it should. Caroline didn't blink. Her reply was a dagger. What terrifies me, she said, voice calm, is when media empires like yours pretend to be neutral while actively shaping public opinion. You talk about authoritarianism, but your network silences stories that don't fit the narrative. You champion fact-checking only when it favors your politics. The audience went quiet. She stepped forward. You want to talk about context? Okay. Context. CNN spent 3 years pushing a Russia narrative that collapsed. Context. Your so-called experts dismissed the lab leak theory until it became undeniable. Context. You platform division while preaching unity. You don't inform, Miles. You indoctrinate. A man in the crowd stood and shouted, "Truth bomb!" Caroline's voice grew sharper. Your job should be to hold the powerful accountable, not manufacture consent for your corporate allies. So when you ask about truth, remember this. The American people are awake now, and they're not buying your polished lies anymore. When the crowd began chanting her name, Hargrove knew the tide had turned. Miles tried to respond, but the momentum was gone. His mouth opened, but nothing of substance came out. Alex tried to redirect. Let's shift to public perception. Miss Leavitt, how do you respond to critics who say the Trump administration fostered division and hate? Caroline's tone changed. Steady, grounded. Division? You mean the result of decades of forgotten towns, shuttered factories, and political betrayal? Donald Trump didn't divide America. He revealed the divide your side ignored. She looked directly into the camera. The steelworker in Pennsylvania, the single mom in Ohio, the trucker in Texas, they weren't radicalized. They were abandoned. And when someone finally listened to them, you called it hate. The right side of the studio roared. She stepped closer to Miles. You call their voices dangerous because they don't echo yours. But guess what? They don't need your permission to be heard. Suddenly, the audience on the right began to chant again. Car-O-Line, Car-O-Line, duh! Miles looked stunned, like a man watching the ground shift beneath his feet. Alex raised his voice. Order, please. Let's keep this civil. But it was too late. The civil part was over. He went personal, but she went surgical. Miles leaned in, desperate to recover. Caroline, with all due respect, you're young, inexperienced, and clearly trained to deliver sound bites, not substance. You're good at playing the crowd, I'll give you that. But this isn't a cheerleading contest, it's policy. Gasps echoed. Caroline smiled slowly. You want to go personal, Miles? Let's go. She stepped forward, every word sharpened to a point. I may be young, but I've sat in briefing rooms you've only seen on TV. I've read intel reports you'd fumble to interpret. I've stood behind a president you despise, not because he failed, but because he succeeded without you. The MAGA crowd roared. Caroline kept going. I don't come from a media family. I didn't intern at the New York Times. I worked, I listened, I fought. And everything I've learned, I've earned. Unlike you, I didn't inherit a platform. I earned a voice. Miles looked rattled. Caroline paused, then added one final strike. You don't hate me because I'm wrong. You hate me because I'm not afraid of you. It was just 12 words, but they'll be replayed 1,000,000 times. The energy shifted. Everyone felt it. Viewers at home leaned in. Phones were already recording. Miles muttered, This isn't journalism, it's theater. Caroline's eyes flashed. No, Miles, this is America finally talking back. She turned to the crowd, then directly into the camera. You call them deplorables. I call them patriots. You call it noise. I call it the voice of the forgotten. Then, with deliberate calm, she delivered the line that would explode across social media. We're not here to please you. We're here to replace you. The crowd exploded. People jumped from their seats. Chants, applause, chaos. Miles sat back, stunned, mouth slightly open. Alex Harper looked down at his notes, shook his head, and whispered to himself, Well, that's the clip. And the world agreed. He lost control. She stayed flawless. Miles Hargrove was unraveling. He shifted in his seat, trying to recover some semblance of control. The crowd's chants still echoed. His voice, once full of smug certainty, now wavered. She's just a mouthpiece, he snapped, grasping for impact. This whole thing is a cult. You're all clapping for propaganda. The MAGA side erupted in boos. Caroline didn't move. Her hands rested lightly on the table. Her expression said it all, unshaken, untouched, unmoved. Alex Harper tried to salvage the segment. "Miles, are you suggesting—" "Yes, I'm suggesting exactly that," Miles cut in, voice rising. "She doesn't answer tough questions. She throws red meat at a mob and calls it patriotism." Caroline finally spoke, calm and surgical. "No, Miles, I answer the questions you're too afraid to ask. You don't want dialogue, you want dominance, but the American people have tuned you out, and tonight they're tuning in to something real." Gasps, then applause, even a few claps from the left side of the studio. Miles opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His argument had collapsed beneath the weight of its own arrogance. One walked out to cheers, the other slipped out the back door. The show's closing credits hadn't even rolled before Twitter exploded. #Leavitt for Hargrove was trending in 30 states. The line, "We're not here to please you, we're here to replace you," had already hit 2 million views. Back in the studio, Caroline stood tall, smiling graciously as producers scrambled to get her backstage. Her red dress blazed beneath the stage lights like a symbol of fire and victory. Miles Hargrove sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the crowd that had turned on him. A low murmur of dissent echoed from a shrinking cluster of supporters. Reporters flooded the stage entrance. Fox News posted, "Caroline Leavitt drops a truth bomb live on CNN." CNN's own commentators whispered off-air, "It looked bad for us." As Caroline exited, her aides beamed. Cell phones flashed. Chants of "Caroline, Caroline," Suits echoed from outside the studio. Supporters waved signs. Others cried. And Miles? He exited alone through a side hallway, head down. No camera followed. No crowd waited. Just silence. By the end of the night, Caroline Leavitt wasn't just a press secretary. She was a movement. Clips flooded TikTok and Instagram. Conservative influencers hailed her as the future. Liberal critics scrambled to frame her as dangerous, but even they couldn't deny the performance. A young woman, once mocked for her loyalty, had just gone head-to-head with the media elite and walked out to a standing ovation. And somewhere in the background, as producers reviewed the footage for re-airing, Alex Harper whispered, "That wasn't a debate. That was history." The screen faded to black, and the world hit replay